Hi, my name is Noah Neal. I'm with the Key Performance Ideas Cloud Services practice, and today we're going to be discussing a method for exporting data out of PBCS, referred to as data writeback to flat file, also referred to as export data to flat file. This particular method is one of several means for exporting data out of PBCS. The other two that come to mind are export data as a calculation, often done through a business rule, and also the export data job, which is typically run through the console. This particular method is done through data management, and we're going to be discussing the steps needed for setting up this process in our Key Performance Ideas test environment for PBCS. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm first going to go to Administer and Data Management. And to set up my integration, I'm going to begin in the Setup section. You can see I have several subsections involved here. The first grouping of which is Configure. So several settings here for system, application, security, and user. These are typically set up as based on user preference. They're actually not going to have very much of a bearing at all on our data writeback method. In fact, you could probably leave the default as they are currently. And as such, we're going to go straight into the register subsection here. Let's take a look at source system. In source system, you can see we have several set up already here, all with the type of file. So typically, users use data management as a tool for importing data into their planning application. And as such, they're bringing a data file into the system through data management and loading that data into the application. So the source is the file. However, in our particular case, we're kind of doing the opposite. We're using the data that's currently in our planning application and exporting that out to a flat file. So we're actually not going to work with this particular subsection at all. We're actually going to go into the next section, which is the target application. And this is really where we're going to begin our integration. You can see that we have several target applications already set up here. Ignore these for now. The main one you should be focused on is the planning application, which is the PBCS application housed in our particular environment here, this Plantastic test. The application is called Plantastic 1. Let's take a look at it. If we go back to our main page here and click Launch Application, you can see we have Plantastic 1 and multiple cubes associated with this application. The main cube and the employee cube are the main ones of interest. Let me just say that the primary difference between the two is that the employee cube includes the employee dimension. For our particular demonstration here, we're only going to be focused with the main cube, and as such, we're not going to be accounting for that employee dimension at all. So considering that, let's take a look at the details here of our Plantastic application. You can see that we're calling out the dimensions associated with the main cube: account, currency, department, entity, and version. UD stands for user defined. So user defined 1, 2, 3. Doesn't really matter the number, just as long as it's unique. And then there's also system tags here. So for account, you can see all caps account, and also for entity. It's best to think of these as tags. So you're basically calling out the dimensions that you want to accommodate. And you can see, as such, we've left employee blank. And also, we've left period, years, and scenario blank as well. For period and years, these time frame dimensions, we're actually going to be doing the mapping for them through period mapping. And for scenario, we're actually going to be doing that through category mapping. So that's why those are blank as well. So considering that, you can see that we've tagged the dimensions that we're interested in, the dimensions in our main cube. We're basically setting ourselves up to extract data from the main cube and write it to a flat file for use in reviewing that data or possibly sending that file to another system. But you can think of the planning application actually as not the target here, but as actually the source. So we have that established. Let's talk about the target now. We're actually going to add it right now, adding a local of type custom application. So you can see we also have an option to add planning application. That's already been added. That's our Plantastic 1 application, which we're using as our source. Here's our custom application, which is our target. It's beneficial to think about this custom application as the file. So if you think source to target, we have our source as the Plantastic 1 planning application. We have our target as the custom application, AKA the file. So source to target, planning app to custom app. Let's take a look at the dimensions that we would want to define as part of this custom app. Well, we just want to use the same dimensions that we've called out here. So we're just going to basically just delineate the same dimensions here. So before we had account, let's just call this account. And mention class is account. And you can see it's a system defined value there. Let's go on to the next dimension, currency, cur. This is actually a custom dimension, so we're just going to define it as generic. And UD1. Let's go into the next dimension here. Department. Again, another custom dimension. Entity. And lastly, we had our version dimension. Which is go ahead and save this after we name it. Let's go ahead and just call it app WB for write back. And you can see it's been saved. You can see that we have these 5 dimensions that are aligned with the planning source. And let's go ahead and go to the next section, which is our import format. In this section, we're basically going to be doing some high-level mapping to map the dimensions that we've called out in our source to the dimensions that we've called out in our target. Let's go ahead and add that right now. Let's just go ahead and call this import format WB. Source type is actually EPM because it's our EPM application. Target is also going to be EPM. Let's just call this test import format for write back WB. Source, again, Plantastic 1. Target, app WB. Go ahead and save it. And we're just going to be doing one-to-one mapping here. So amount is amount. Account, currency, department, entity, and version. go ahead and save it. And we should be all set here. Let's go on to the next section, which is our location. Go ahead and add a new one. And we're just going to call this location right back. Here we're going to group our import format as well as other parameters that we set up earlier. And we called our import format WB. Let's call this location for right back. And we should be all good here. At this point, we can go on to period mapping and category mapping. Again, the reason why we did not call out those time frame dimensions in target applications because we're doing them in period mapping. And those time frame dimensions are period and year. You can see we have several options here. We have global mapping, which defines several mappings as based on period for a range of periods and years. We also have sections for application mapping and source mapping, which allow us to choose subsections or slices of our global mapping. So we can call them out through application mapping or through source mapping. There's no particular need to do that in our particular case because we'd like the option to choose whichever time frame we want. So we're just going to leave global mapping as it is currently. We'll circle back to those mappings shortly. Additionally, we have our category mapping for scenario. You can think of target category as the scenario member, and you can see we have a couple set up already. In our particular case, we're going to look at moving actuals data to the flat file for the export. And you can see we already have that defined. In your particular case, if you wanted to add a new mapping, that's easy enough. You just click add, and you can just type in whatever designation you'd want here, as well as the target category, aka the scenario member in this field here. Again, if you wanted to choose a particular subsection as based on global, you just come over to your application mapping and add a particular mapping from global and then save it. No real need to do that here. We're just going to stick with the options that we have in global mapping. At this point, we should be all set up with our setup section. We can go on to the workflow components. We're actually going to start with data load mapping. We have several different options here. You can see, but we're going to actually start with the lower left here, this option for selecting the point of view. Go ahead and find our location, which we had as location right back. And in our particular example, let's just choose one of our global mappings for period. You can also type it in. We're just going to say December 15. And this is going to be for actuals data. So let's think about what we're doing here if we rewind a little bit. Specifically here, we're saying that we want to extract the data from the main cube that is in Plantastic 1 and write that data to a flat file for the intersections that are December FY15 and for the actuals scenario. Let's go ahead and define our mappings here. You can see we have several different options. If you've worked with data management before for loading data to the planning application, then you're familiar with each of these. In our particular case, we can just use the wildcard mapping as set up through like and that's just done simply through a asterisk. So we're just saying, write whatever is in the source to the target. Just go ahead and call this account right back. Just go into currency, same situation. Oops. Curve right back. Department, similar. Here I should point out that if you're using prefixes in your planning application, so for example, D123 is for Department 123, you can actually take off those prefixes in the file that you'd be exporting, and that would be done here. So saying, D asterisk, just going to asterisk, would take the member that is D123 and just post it to 123 in the file. We're just going to call this department right back. And lastly, version. So at this time, we've set up our member mappings. We're ready to go into the data log rule. We have our POV defined as we would want it here. Let's go ahead and click Add to set up our rule. And let's work our way from the bottom going up. So here you can see we have a couple of options available. Let's go ahead and select Yes here so that we can capture data at parent level accounts. Let's go ahead and add some filters as well for the sake of this demonstration. So for example, account. Let's just say that we want to capture net income data. You'd use a function by descendants. And let's also include version as well. We can also choose to just type it in. Let's say we want our final data as well as our working data. Let's also include currency. Let's just say we want local. Or the dimension entity. Let's just say we want data strictly for Mexico. And lastly, our department. And let's just capture multiple departments for the sake of this demonstration through the sentence of total department. And at this point, we've captured a slice of data for our file. We also have some target options here. So specifically, enable export to file, yes, that's the purpose of this particular integration. For our delimiter, let's go ahead and use pipe. And for our file, let's just call it export right back. We also have some custom options as well. We're going to leave those alone. Let's go ahead and call our rule, DL rule. WB. Category is actuals. Our period mapping should be set. Our source plan type is main. Let's put a description here and just call this DL data load rule for write back. Let's go ahead and save it. Choose a unique name here, write back 1. And we have our data load rule. So at this time, we're all set to execute. And we're actually going to run the process right now, importing it from the source, which is our Plantastic 1 planning application, and exporting it to the target, which is that custom application, app.wb, which is also delineating our export file. Our time frame was December 15, and we're just going to choose replace. Go ahead and click run. It might take a couple minutes here. We'll go into our process details. While this is loading, I should point out that we can recycle this particular data load rule for whatever type of intersection that we'd be interested in. We could add more members, we could capture more data, we could capture less data, we could capture additional time frames. And you can see that it's all complete. At this point, we can just click download to open our file. And you can see here's our data. Pipe delimited as we define, our members are captured, and we have data for any particular record. At this point, we can review it in more detail. We can email it, we can load it into a target system, but we should be all set. The integration works as we would hope, and you can recycle it as I described earlier as needed. Thank you all, and I hope that you enjoyed this particular demo on data write back to flat file.